Section 13 of History of Egypt, Chaldaea, Syria, Babylonia, and Assyria, Volume 3, by Gaston Maspero. Read for LibriVox.org into the public domain. Chapter 1. Ancient Chaldea, Part 13. In the time of the Greeks and Romans, the Chaldeans were accustomed to navigate the Tigris, either in round, flat-bottomed boats, of little draught, kufas in fact, or in rafts placed upon inflated skins, exactly similar in appearance and construction to the keleks of our own day. These keleks were as much at home on the sea as upon the river, and they may still be found in the Persian Gulf engaged in the coasting trade. Doubtless many of these were included among the vessels of Uru mentioned in the texts, but there were also among the latter those long, large rowing boats with curved stem and stern, Egyptian in their appearance, which are to be found roughly incised on some ancient cylinders. These primitive fleets were not disposed to risk the navigation of the open sea. They preferred to proceed slowly along the shore, hugging it in all cases, except when it was necessary to reach some group of neighbouring islands. Many days of navigation were thus required to make a passage which one of our smallest sail boats would effect in a few hours, and at the end of their longest voyages they were not very distant from their point of departure. It would be a great mistake to suppose them capable of sailing around Arabia and of fetching blocks of stone by sea from the Sinaitic peninsula. Such an expedition, which would have been dangerous even for Greek or Roman galleys, would have been simply impossible for them. If they ever crossed the Strait of Ormuz, it was an exceptional thing, their ordinary voyages being confined within the limits of the Gulf. The merchants of Uru were accustomed to visit regularly the island of Dilmun, the land of Magan, the countries of Milukhah and Guben. From these places they brought cargoes of diorite for their sculptors, building timber for their architects, perfumes and metals transported from Yemen by land, and possibly pearls from the Bahrain Islands. They encountered serious rivalry from the sailors of Dilmun and Magan, whose maritime tribes were then as now accustomed to scour the seas. The risk was great for those who set out on such expeditions, perhaps never to return, but the profit was considerable. Uru, enriched by its commerce, was soon in a position to subjugate the petty neighbouring states, Uruk, Larsam, Lagash, and Nippur. Its territory formed a fairly extended sovereignty, whose lords entitled themselves kings of Shumer and Akkad, and ruled over all southern Chaldaea for many centuries. Several of these kings, the Lugal Kigub Nidudu and the Lugal Kisalsi, of whom some monuments have been preserved to us, seem to have extended their influence beyond these limits prior to the time of Sargon the Elder, and we can date the earliest of them with tolerable probability. Urbau reigned some time around 2900 B.C. He was an energetic builder, and material traces of his activity are to be found everywhere throughout the country. The temple of the sun at Larsam, the temple of Nina in Uruk, and the temples of Inlala and Ninlala in Nippur were indebted to him for their origin or restoration. He decorated or repaired all structures which were not of his own erection. In Uru itself the sanctuary of the moon god owes its foundation to him, and the fortifications of the city were his work. Dungi, his son, was an indefatigable bricklayer, like his father. He completed the sanctuary of the moon god, and constructed buildings in Uruk, Lagash, and Kutha. There is no indication in the inscriptions of his having been engaged in any civil struggle or in war with a foreign nation. We should make a serious mistake, however, if we concluded from this silence that peace was not disturbed in his time. The tie which bound together the petty states of which Uru was composed was of the slightest. The sovereign could barely claim as his own more than the capital, and the districts surrounding it. The other cities recognized his authority, paid him tribute, did homage to him in religious matters, and doubtless rendered him military service also, but each one of them nevertheless maintained its particular constitution and obeyed its hereditary lords. These lords, it is true, lost their title of king, which now belonged exclusively to their suzerain, and each one had to be content in his district with the simple designation of vicegerent, but having once fulfilled their feudal obligations, they had absolute power over their ancient domains, and were able to transmit to their progeny the inheritance they had received from their fathers. Gudea probably, and most certainly his successors, ruled in this way over Lagash, as a fief depending on the crown of Uru. After the manner of the Egyptian barons, The vassals of the kings of Chaldaea submitted to the control of their suzerain without resenting his authority, as long as they felt the curbing influence of a strong hand; but on the least sign of feebleness in their master they reasserted themselves, and endeavoured to recover their independence. A reign of any length was sure to be disturbed by rebellions sometimes difficult to repress: if we are ignorant of any such, it is owing to the fact that inscriptions hitherto discovered are found upon subjects upon which an account of battle would hardly find a fitting place, such as bricks from a temple, votive cones or cylinders of terra cotta, amulets or private seals. We are still in ignorance as to Dungi's successors, and the number of years during which this first dynasty was able to prolong its existence. We can but guess that its empire broke up by disintegration after a period of no long duration. Its cities for the most part became emancipated, and their rulers proclaimed themselves kings once more. We see that the kingdom of Amnanu, for instance, was established on the left bank of the Euphrates, with Uruk as its capital, and that three successive sovereigns at least, of whom Singashid seems to have been the most active, were able to hold their own there. Uru had still, however, sufficient prestige and wealth to make it the actual metropolis of the entire country. No one could become the legitimate lord of Shumir and Akkad before he had been solemnly enthroned in the temple at Uru. For many centuries every ambitious kinglet in turn contended for its possession, and made it his residence. The first of these, about 2500 B.C., were the lords of Nishin, Libit Tanunit, Gamiladar, Enedin, Bursin I., and Ismidagin; afterwards, about 2400 B.C., Gungunum of Nippur made himself master of it. The descendants of Gungunum, amongst others Bursin II., Gimilsin, Inesin, reigned gloriously for a few years. Their records show that they conquered not only a part of Elam, but part of Syria. They were dispossessed in their turn by a family belonging to Larsam, whose two chief representatives, as far as we know, were Nur Amman and his son Sinidinim, about 2300 B.C. Naturally enough, Sinidinim was a builder or repairer of temples, but he added to such work the clearing of the Shatt el Hai and the excavation of a new canal, giving more direct communication between the Shatt and the Tigris, and in thus controlling the water system of the country, became worthy of being considered one of the benefactors of Chaldaea. We have here the mere dust of history, rather than history itself. Here an isolated individual makes his appearance in the record of his name, to vanish when we attempt to lay hold of him; there the stem of a dynasty which breaks abruptly off, pompous preambles, devout formulas, dedications of objects or buildings; here and there the account of some battle, or the indication of some foreign country with which relations of friendship or commerce were maintained: these are the scanty materials out of which to construct a collected narrative. Egypt has not much more to offer us in regard to many of her pharaohs, but we have in her case at least the ascertained framework of her dynasties, in which each fact and each new name falls eventually, and after some uncertainty, into its proper place. The main outlines of the picture are drawn with sufficient exactitude to require no readjustment; the groups are for the most part in their fitting positions; the blank spaces or positions not properly occupied are gradually restricted, and filled in from day to day; the expected moment is in sight when, the arrangement of the whole being accomplished, it will be necessary only to fill in the details. In the case of Chaldaea the framework itself is wanting, and expedients must be resorted to in order to classify the elements entering into its composition. Naram-Sin is in his proper place, or nearly so; but as for Gudea, what interval separates him from Naram-Sin, and at what distance from Gudea are we to place the kings of Uru? The beginnings of Chaldaea have merely a provisional history; the facts in it are certain, but the connection of the facts with one another is too often a matter of speculation. The arrangement which is put forward at present can be regarded only as probable, but it would be difficult to propose a better, until the excavations have furnished us with fresh material; it must be accepted merely as an attempt, without pledging to it our confidence on the one hand, or regarding it with scepticism on the other. End of Part 13. Read by Professor Heather and By. For more free audiobooks or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org.